Thank you very much, Michele. Good morning, everybody. My name is Massimo Cassinelli and I'm a technical journalist, but together with this activity, I also deal with company consultancy services. So I've got double soul, the company assistance and consulting, but also the journalism soul. So this is important because usually when a journalist is talking, he's asked to be talking about trends and numbers, market studies, which are always very important, but often this reality is different from the day-by-day reality you experience every day. So I'll try to put all these souls together, both souls together, in order to give you some ideas and food for thought. Elisabeth has been talking before me and she's very competent in her sector. After me, other skilled and competent people are going to talk. So I'm going to give you some ideas, my contribution to the vision, which is for sure different from the vision you have, or many of your visions, but maybe based on a different experience you can receive new ideas for your work. So today we're going to talk about the value of an IT asset. How worth is an IT asset? What's the value of an IT asset and what is it? The definition is quite easy when you're talking about a building because it's something you can touch, you can experience. But when you're talking about an IT asset, it's intangible sometimes. It's a virtual element, which is typical of IT assets, of course. So when I started working as a journalist, my first director told me, when you write an article, let your grandmother read it. If she understands, that's a very good article. So I always try to follow this suggestion he gave me. So you need to simplify concepts and notions because this way it's easier for you to understand. An asset is basically a piece of a system interacting with other pieces of other systems to make something work. So maybe this is not a definition you would read in a book, but it's easier to understand. So an asset is something that makes it possible for something else to work. Let's take an asset you all have in your company, even though you're not considering it as an asset, a router. You can buy it from any shop, basically, and what's its value? 70 euro. If you search for the price online, you can buy a router for 70 euro. But let me ask a question. Is its value 70 euro? So the value is 70 euro when you buy it, but when you take it to your company, when you use it to make your company network work, the strategic value is different, because if the company is working because you are in internet, you are in a network, and this is possible thanks to a 70 euro router, when the router is not working, the company is not working anymore. So it has a vital strategic value for the company. And this is another important notion, reliability. What does reliability mean? It really means to what extent that device can be effective, how long it will work, and for how long it cannot be working, or you can afford it not to be working. This is a different perspective on value. It's not just a market value, but a strategic value for a company. Reliability. If it's 99%, for instance, it's almost 100%. In these times, you're talking about statistics and everything, so this 99% reliability looks very high, but it just looks very high. Let's think about what 99% reliability means. It means that my router has a 87 hours downtime in a year, which means 11 working days. Can our company survive for 11 days without any network? Well, it depends. But this is what I was mentioning at the beginning. IT assets are very difficult to be assessed because it really depends on the company and how the company is structured. If I am writing as a technical journalist, of course, we cannot always be constantly connected, or we cannot do without a constant connection. We cannot afford 11 days time. But if I'm a technical expert, for instance, and I have to write reports and something like that, if I don't have an internet connection for some days, I can still survive. It's not a big damage. So you need to really assess what the value for an IT asset is. I was talking to a mechanic some weeks ago. Of course, mechanics assets are different if you think, but some time ago it happened to him that he had a network problem, a network failure. He had no internet connection for some days. Well, you think a mechanic is doing maintenance and repairs, of course, but he wasn't able to do his maintenance for the cars, and he lost lots and lots of money in its turnover, and therefore he bought a 4G router for emergency situations in order for his company to work nonetheless. Maybe the connection won't be as fast as with a normal router, 70-euro router, but the internet connection will work nonetheless. Of course, with a 4G router you also have to pay for a SIM card once a year, but it's a small investment that makes a difference also for a mechanic. And this leads us to the following question. What are the IT assets? What are the IT assets you can manage as a responsible, or IT assets you have in a company? I've made a list here. Of course, it's not all-encompassing, but we can think about it, and it will help us think thoroughly about these topics. Well, when we think about IT assets, we think about servers straight away. But when you think about the servers, you don't just have to consider the servers as a whole, but all the elements that are making the servers work and the company work. Of course, you have workstations, PCs, printers, monitors, together with this, and these are all IT assets. Maybe we could stop the list here, but let's think about it. Here I've added something else to this list. I've added several elements such as data, because data are maybe the most important IT asset for the companies. Customers' data, production data, or the machine specifications or operational information. So data are maybe the most important IT asset nowadays for a company. Then power as well. This is also an IT asset. Without power, our infrastructure cannot work. So UPS, for instance, or if you think about a contract with a service provider for power, you don't think about it as an IT asset, but it is actually. Or software is also an IT asset, and very important asset. Also, software, if you buy software, maybe they cannot be considered as a physical asset, a tangible asset, but nonetheless it's a piece of my company making something else work, or maybe making everything about the company work. For instance, cloud services are nowadays very important. You can't own them physically, you are paying for the use, but they are an asset. And also people are an asset, and users, of course, are an asset. Maintenance operators, all of the operators and users are an IT asset today. And there's another direction for IT nowadays, production machines, for instance. Just think about the machines that are integrated with the management system, with the management software. Let me ask you a question, we will talk about it later. Is a lathe an IT asset today? Let me just leave you with this question, then we will talk about it later. So, a lathe, is it an asset? And another question, how can you manage all of this on your own, all of your company on your own? Either you think you can do it, or you ask your boss and you say, you are paying me too less so not enough for what I'm managing. Now, jokes apart, assets are very important, and in a company you need tools in order to manage them properly. You cannot think you can manage them in a smart way on your own, or you cannot be too approximate in managing them. So you need an IT asset management in your company for sure. And the most common definition could be something that helps you making an asset inventory and manage your assets. But this is not enough, because a very important aspect is missing. Such a product is important to know the strategic value of all your IT assets. So the strategic value is very big. But let's see more in detail what this means with practical examples. Let's take a normal printer. In 2020, what can be the value of a printer? €500 maybe, depends on the model, on the functions, of course. In my company, I have a printer, but is its value really €500? Yes, maybe it's worth €500 if you're working in the administration department, in the accounting department. But maybe nowadays in some departments it's not worth €500 because nobody's printing anything anymore. So in a company, maybe a printer is not a valuable asset. But just think about a printer in a notary's office. What's the strategic value in a notary's office? If you cannot print a contract and cannot sell, so a building cannot be sold or purchased, for instance, or if you're in a carrier's delivery service office, there are trucks that cannot leave the parking lot because the transport document hasn't been printed. So just think about, for instance, the logistics center of Amazon. If all of the labels with the addresses of the recipients cannot be printed, everybody's going to panic in Amazon. So in some cases, printers are very valuable assets. It really depends on the context then. And how important is ignorance in a broader meaning? So not knowing what our IT assets are and how they should be managed will cost. So now, I don't want to go too deep into this, but just think you have a malfunction, a fault in your system. If you don't exactly know all of your assets, what you have in your company, how they work, you have very long recovery times before everything's going to work again. So this means thousands of working hours lost because the system is stuck and so on. So this is very important. You need to know your assets. And one more important thing. Who is responsible for this? Who is in charge? I mean, not responsible for a problem. I mean, who's in charge? Who needs to understand why a problem occurred? Because they need to make sure this doesn't occur again. So you need to understand why a problem occurred, how and when, so that you avoid repeating the same problem. And also in terms of budget management, if you don't know your assets, you risk purchasing the same thing twice, or you have software licenses you're not using, and the user needs a software license. You buy the license, but you realize you had unused licenses, very similar licenses, because you had no idea of what you had in your company as IT assets. So, or if you need to buy another router, it's €70. Okay, it's not a big expense, a big price, let's say. It won't be a problem for the company's budget, but you know that for IT purchases, the budget is sometimes limited, and therefore you need to have targeted investments. Therefore, you need to understand what the most valuable assets are and buy those assets. So the €70 router, well, of course, it's worth having a backup router in case something goes wrong. Because if a company depends on the internet connection, then of course the router has a very big strategic value. Maybe you can buy something more expensive than that, but you can still have a cheaper one as a backup. So you need to understand what the assets are that run a higher risk or that are more strategic to the company, and of course provide a strategy, a backup strategy for it. If a person leaves the company, for instance, because they rent or they retire or they need to stop working, can you replace that person, or do you need to have other resources to replace that person? And of course also the responsibility for illegal software or unlicensed software. You need to be aware of the licenses you have in a company, because sometimes illegal softwares are installed, or you're not aware of the licenses that have expired and so on. Or sometimes in smaller companies, in professional devices, you've got non-professional antivirus software or personal antivirus software. You can't have such things in a business context, of course. Well, it rarely is the case, but if there's an audit or a control on this, you can be fined even. So you need to pay attention to this. And also you need an automatic platform for knowledge processes. This is crucial to manage IT assets, the IT assets you have in a company. And about the cost of ignorance, once again, two more important comments. The legislative decree 231 for information security breaches and responsibility. Of course, a breach, a violation performed by an employee, in case you go to court, of course, it's difficult to say you made or you could in order to avoid this violation to occur. And to say that the user was informed about the violation in order to avoid it. If you don't exactly know what your company IT assets are. So also in case you have a litigation, you need to know what your IT assets are in the company in order to win, of course, in order to protect yourselves against violations. So you need to know your IT asset value. And of course, if you want to provide some numbers and statistics, there's an important study that says that 25% of the software costs are for the software management itself. So this is very important. So software don't just have a purchasing price, but also a maintenance price over the software lifespan. So you need tools in order to support you in this. Then let's move on to the next step, and let's go back to the lathe I was mentioning. Of course, we have the Industry 4.0. You've probably heard about it over and over again. There are lots of definitions about it. So the use of technologies and IT in manufacturing and so on. But there's a very beautiful definition of this by the Ministry for Economic Development. In this slide you can see the terms related to IT, and if you look, the half of these words used to describe the fourth production revolution are IT words and terms, which means IT is playing a more and more important role in industrial production. So the lathe, we are still calling it lathe, but as a matter of fact, it's no longer a lathe, but a CNC machine. That's to say, it's a machine where an employee is pressing a button and the machine does everything on its own, but it's still a machine that is managed by software. And they are also an IT asset as machines. And therefore, an IT asset manager has more and more responsibilities. They have to account for everything that happens around him and around this software. So this is something our government has also realized. So we are talking about the fourth industrial revolution, and this was implemented by the Transition 4.0 plan. But why am I talking about this? Because this 4.0 plan implies many subsidies and financing for those who are investing in digitalization services and new technologies. Because usually you focus on production machines, but if you read the plan carefully, there are two attachments, two annexes. One that describes machines, and the Annex B is talking about production software. And among the production software eligible for these subsidies, you also have applications and software systems for production coordination with integration features for services for instance, plant logistics and production functions and so on. And this is very close to the description of an IT asset software, IT asset management software. So why am I mentioning this? Because with the Financial Law 2020, also these softwares can receive funding subsidies. So you can have a 15% credit when purchasing them. So you pay less taxes, basically a tax discount based on the purchase of software, and by 50, namely by 15%. So you probably better think about it. It's an opportunity you have in 2020. Up until 2019, you can only have this tax discount if you also bought some hardware. But starting from 2020, these subsidies are no longer related with the hardware, but just with software. So if you purchase software, you can have this tax discount. 15% tax discount for production software, which is a quite interesting discount. So you should assess when you're purchasing something what the value of the item is, but also the discount you might get. One more thing about such purchases, of course, you need to declare in the invoice to which purpose you're buying the software. It needs to be related with the 4.0 transition, so you need to put a note in the invoice about the so-called subsidized assets, the specific legislative references. You can buy the reference from the slide. You can take your time. I'll leave you a few seconds for you to copy from the slide. And anyway, you can. There was a circular letter by the Italian Agenzia delle Entrate, the income agency, to get these subsidies in an easier way. Now, a last statement that will maybe surprise you: don't buy an IT asset product or service project management. So what I mean is, don't buy such a product, but adopt a solution that adds value to your IT assets. So don't just think about the product, but think about what the product can do for your company and how the product can improve your daily activities. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope I gave you some food for thought or some ideas that can be useful for your work and that can help you think about what our colleagues are going to say after me. Of course, they have an in-depth overview of the aspects they will talk about. They have a very long-standing experience, and therefore it is worth also listening to what they have to say. So thank you very much for your attention once again.